There's a specific quality that a lot of DIY travel advisor sites have, and visitors pick up on it. Not consciously. They can't usually tell you what it is, but they land on the site and something registers. And that something affects whether they trust you enough to reach out. I want to be clear about what this episode is and isn't. It's not an argument against building your own site. The tools available now, Squarespace, Wix, WordPress, are genuinely capable of producing something good. Budget and building your own site are completely reasonable, especially when you're starting out. What I'm talking about is something more specific than platform choice. There are particular things that happen in the process of building a site without a design background, patterns that get repeated across a lot of DIY sites, and those patterns are what create that quality visitors feel. The frustrating part is that when you're the one who built the site, you often can't see them. You're too close to it. You made each decision individually, and each one seemed fine at the time, and you end up with something that feels slightly off in aggregate in a way you can't quite locate. Once you know what to look for, though, they're not hard to spot, and most of them are fixable. That's what this is about. I call these the amateur signals, the specific visual and structural patterns that register in a visitor's mind as something a non-designer built. Not consciously. Most of the time, visitors aren't auditing your topography. They're not cataloging your spacing inconsistencies, but something pattern matches for them. And it shows up as a vague sense that the site feels unpolished or assembled rather than designed, or like they're not quite sure about you. We're going to go through the signals one by one. For each one, I want to explain what it looks like, why it happens, because the why is usually pretty understandable, and what actually fixes it. Some of these are fast, some take more time, but knowing which ones matter most is half the work. Someone has been planning a Tanzania safari for a long time. Not casually, seriously, with intent. They've been watching the migration patterns, reading about the Serengeti versus the Ngorongoro, trying to understand whether the timing they have available in October lines up with what they actually want to see. It's a kind of trip where the difference between planning it well and planning it badly is enormous. And they know enough now to know they don't know enough. They want to work with someone who does this. So they start looking for a safari specialist. Through some combination of a search and a directory listing, they find two advisors who both fit the description. Both specialize in East Africa, both have testimonials, both list Tanzania as a core focus. They pull up the first site. It's fine, in a sense. There's information on it. There's a photo of the advisor. There's a contact page. But something about being on it is slightly uncomfortable. The fonts aren't all the same. The spacing between the sections is uneven. Some sections are packed together, and others have a lot of air that doesn't feel intentional. The headline says, "Unforgettable African safaris await you," which is a sentence that could belong to literally any safari operator on Earth. The About page looks noticeably different from the homepage in a way they couldn't explain if you asked them to. There are 8 items in the navigation. The main photo is a generic savanna shot that looks like it came from a search engine. They don't leave that site thinking the kerning is inconsistent. They leave thinking, I'm not sure about this one. Then they pull up the second site. It's cleaner. The photography looks like it actually came from the field. Not perfect composition, but clearly real, clearly specific. The headline says something like, "Safari planning for people who want to get the timing and the camps right." The About page sounds like a person, not a brochure. There's a scheduler link from a button near the bottom of the specialty page they've been reading. They book a call with the second advisor. They've been on both sites for about the same amount of time. If you ask them to explain the difference, they'd probably say something like, "The second one just felt more professional," or "I trusted it more." They couldn't point to specific things, but the specific things are there. The amateur signals made the difference, and understanding them is what makes it possible to fix them. The first signal, and one of the most common, is what I'd call font chaos. Here's how it happens. You start with a template. The template has a font pairing that actually works, a heading font and a body font that the designer who made the template chose carefully. Then you start editing. You add a new section and use a different font because you like how it looks in that context. You paste in text from a document you wrote somewhere else, and it imports with its own formatting. You bold a headline and bump up the size to make it feel more prominent. Now, over time, the site accumulates 3 or 4 different fonts, heading sizes that vary from section to section, and text that's not consistently weighted or spaced. Step back, the page has a kind of visual noise. Nothing is clearly in charge of the typographic system, and visitors feel this, not as the fonts are inconsistent, but as a general sense that the page looks slightly off, slightly unpolished. The fix is straightforward. 2 fonts maximum, applied consistently everywhere, a heading font and a body font. Every heading on every page uses the heading font at the same sizes and the same weights. Every body text uses the body font. Most website builders have a global typography setting specifically for this. Use it instead of adjusting fonts section by section. Set it once, and the whole site stays consistent. The second signal is inconsistent spacing. It's one of the harder ones to notice from inside your own site because it's subtle. Good design has rhythm. Sections have consistent padding. There's a predictable amount of space above the headings, below images, between elements. You don't consciously notice it on a well-designed site. You just feel like the page is easy to move through. On a lot of DIY sites, the spacing is whatever each section happened to land at when it was built. Some sections have generous padding and some are cramped. Images in some places are flush against text, and in others they have breathing room. Headings sometimes float in a lot of space, and sometimes they're just jammed against the content above them. None of it follows the system. The reason this happens is that builders let you adjust spacing section by section. And when you're building, you're making those calls one at a time based on how each individual thing looks in the moment, not based on whether it's consistent with everything else. The fix? Decide on a consistent spacing value and apply it the same way everywhere. Pick a section padding, a heading margin, a gap between elements. Most builders let you set this globally. Use that. Uniform spacing is one of those things that makes a site feel considered, even when people can't articulate why. Third signal is sections that don't connect to anything, what I think of as decorative clutter. On a lot of travel advisor sites, this shows up as featured destination section on the homepage, with 4 or 5 places listed where those places don't obviously connect to the advisor's specialty or to anything else on the page. Or a counter section, 200 trips booked, 15 years in business, 100% satisfaction. That looks like it was lifted from a corporate template. Or a why travel block with some inspirational copy that doesn't relate to what comes before or after it. Each of those probably seemed like a good addition at the time. It was on a template, or it looked good on another site, or it seemed like the kind of thing you're supposed to have. But what they do in aggregate is dilute the focus of the page. Every section should be doing a specific job, building trust, explaining who you help, demonstrating expertise, making it easy to take the next step. A section that isn't doing one of those jobs is just noise, and it makes the overall structure harder to follow. The honest test? For each section on your site, ask what it's actually accomplishing. What does it make the visitor feel, understand, or do? If you can't answer that clearly, that section is probably worth cutting or rethinking. This is hard to do with your own site because everything you put there felt worth putting there at the time. But editing ruthlessly is often what separates a site that feels designed from one that feels assembled. The fourth signal is blurry visual hierarchy. And this one matters more than it might seem because it affects how easy the page is to read and whether the things you actually want visitors to notice get noticed. Visual hierarchy is the system that tells your eye what to pay attention to first, second, third. On a well-structured page, the most important thing is the most visually dominant. The headline is noticeably larger than the subheadline. Section headings are clearly differentiated from body text. The call to action stands out from surrounding elements. On a lot of DIY sites, this system is fuzzy. The headline is only slightly bigger than everything else. Headings and body text are close in size. The CTA button is the same color as other elements on the page, so it doesn't pull attention. Everything is kind of competing at roughly the same level. The result is that you land on the page and your eye doesn't know where to go. You have to do more cognitive work to read it. The things you most want visitors to register, the main message, the invitation to take action, don't get the emphasis they need. This is mostly about scale and contrast. Headlines need to be noticeably larger, not slightly larger, than everything else. Body text should be clearly smaller than any heading. The CTA button needs to be a color that makes it distinct from the rest of the page. Those contrasts are what create clear hierarchy. When they're sharp, the page guides the eye. When they're soft, the page looks flat. The fifth signal is generic copy. I've talked about this in other episodes, but it's worth naming in this context because it's one of the most visible amateur signals of all. When you build a site yourself, you usually write the copy yourself too. And most people, when they sit down to write about their own business, default to language they've seen on similar sites, phrases that feel professional because they're familiar. Passionate travel advisor dedicated to creating unforgettable experiences. Making your dream vacation a reality. Let me handle the details while you enjoy the journey. These phrases sound like travel advisory marketing. They also say absolutely nothing specific. They could be on any advisor site anywhere. They don't tell the visitor who specifically you help, what you specifically know, or what the specific experience of working with you is actually like. Generic copy is a strong amateur signal because professional copywriters know how to write with specificity. They ask who exactly this is for, what exactly they need, what exactly this business offers, and the copy reflects those answers. On a DIY site, that process often didn't happen. The copy was written quickly from what felt like familiar territory, and it landed on generic. The fix isn't necessarily hiring a copywriter, though that's an option. It's slowing down and doing the thinking first. Who specifically am I talking to with this headline? What is their specific situation? What do I specifically offer that helps them with that? Then write those answers plainly. The specificity is what makes copy feel real rather than templated. And it's one of the highest impact changes you can make to a site. The sixth signal is stock photography that reads as stock photography. Most people at this point have enough experience on the internet to have developed pattern recognition for stock images. There's a quality to them, a certain kind of lighting, a certain posedness, a certain generic beauty that registers as this is advertising imagery. And when a site is full of that imagery, it creates a slight distance. You're looking at a representation of travel, not evidence of actual travel. On travel advisor sites specifically, this is almost always easy to see. Generic beaches, generic couples at overlooks, generic cityscapes that could be from anywhere. Photography doesn't say anything specific about who this advisor is or what they actually do. When a site has photography that looks like it came from real trips, even technically imperfect photos, even iPhone shots, the whole site feels different, more real, more credible. The advisor who has actual photos from Tanzania client trips is immediately more convincing than the one with Getty Images Africa photography, even if the Getty images are technically better pictures. If you don't have your own travel photos yet, this is worth actively working on building. Even a handful of real, specific images changes how a site feels. Stock is a placeholder, not a solution. The seventh signal is color problems, and it comes in two versions. The first is too many colors. An accent color here, a different button color there, a highlighted section in another color, until the site is using 5 or 6 colors with no system. It reads as visually loud. Nothing is clearly the color of your brand because there are too many competing for that role. The second version is colors that don't work together. Background and text that don't have enough contrast to read comfortably, accent colors that fight the photography, combinations that create a visual vibration that's slightly unpleasant to look at. Clean color palette for a travel advisor site is usually pretty restrained. A neutral base, white, off-white, a light gray or warm cream, one primary accent color for buttons and key elements, maybe one secondary accent used sparingly. The photography is where the visual richness comes from. The design elements should support the photos, not compete with them. If your site is using more colors than that and it doesn't feel quite right, simplifying the palette is usually a significant improvement. The eighth signal is overcrowded navigation. When you build a site yourself, there's a natural tendency to want everything accessible from the top. So the menu accumulates items over time: home, about, cruises, family travel, destination weddings, blog, testimonials, honeymoons, destinations, contact, until there are 8 or 10 things in the menu. Each one seemed like a reasonable addition. The aggregate is a navigation bar that looks cluttered and a mobile menu that's a long list to scroll through. A clean navigation usually has 4 or 5 items. The most important pages. Everything else gets linked from within those pages or from contextual links in the content. The call to action, schedule a call, book a consult, should be a button in or near the navigation, visually distinct from the nav links, not buried at the end of a long list of items. Trimming the navigation down feels scary when you're attached to everything that's in there, but visitors navigating a simpler menu find what they're looking for faster, and the site feels less overwhelming to land on. The ninth signal is one of the most common. The site doesn't feel like a single coherent thing from page to page. This happens because when you build a site yourself, you build different pages at different times, in different moods, sometimes months apart. The home page gets built one way, the about page gets a slightly different layout. The services pages get a different treatment. By the time everything is done, the pages don't quite match. Different fonts showing up in different places, spacing that's applied differently section to section, the about page looking noticeably different from the home page in ways that are hard to pin down. Visitors feel this as a sense of disjointedness, like something shifted when they click through. The site doesn't have the internal consistency of something that was designed as a whole. The fix is to do a page-to-page audit. Pick one page as your reference, usually the home page, and compare every other page against it. Where are the fonts different? Where are the spacing and layout choices inconsistent? Standardize those discrepancies. Most of the work here is just noticing the differences and making the other pages match the reference. The 10th signal is scope rather than design, and it might be the most common thing I see across DIY travel advisor sites. There's just too much on them. Too many sections on the homepage, too many pages in the navigation, too many types of trips listed, too many testimonials displayed at once, too many calls to action competing with each other. Every time the advisor thought of something to add, they added it. Each individual addition probably made sense in isolation, but collectively, the site becomes overwhelming to navigate. There's no clear sense of what's most important, no obvious place for the eye to go, no clear path forward. The visitor has to do significant work to find the signal in the noise. Restraint is hard to apply to your own site because everything you put there felt worth putting there. But editing down, cutting sections that aren't doing clear work, trimming the navigation, reducing the number of things competing for attention almost always improves a site significantly. The question to ask for every element, is this earning its place? Is it doing a specific job for the visitor's experience? If not, it's probably worth cutting or consolidating somewhere. If you've been listening to these and recognizing your site in some of them, the question is where to start. Not everything needs to happen at once. Fonts and copy are usually the highest impact relative to the effort. Cleaning up font inconsistency is fast, and the before and after difference is visible immediately. Strengthening the headline copy, making it specific and direct instead of generic, often changes how the site feels more than almost anything else, because copy is the first thing visitors process. After that, page-to-page inconsistency and navigation cleanup. Both meaningfully improve the coherence of the site without being particularly technical to address. Spacing and color are real, but they tend to be more subtle. Fix the more visible things first and then come back to the fine details. And if you go through all of this and the site still has that quality you can feel but can't locate, it might just mean it's time for outside eyes. Someone who looks at a lot of websites can usually tell you quickly where the main problems are. That's not a knock on what you built. It's just that some things are easier to see when you're not the one who built it. The traveler who ended up booking a call with a second Tanzania specialist couldn't have told you what the amateur signals were. They couldn't have pointed to the inconsistent fonts or the generic headline or the 8-item navigation. They just had a feeling. That feeling is the thing. Visitors aren't auditing your design. They're experiencing it. And the experience either builds the sense of this person is credible and professional, or it quietly erodes it. Most advisors building their own sites have no idea this is happening, because when you're inside the site, you can't feel what a stranger feels landing on it for the first time. Now you can see the signals. That's the valuable thing. You can actually look at your site with some distance and notice which ones are there. And most of them are fixable, not in an afternoon necessarily, but without rebuilding anything from scratch. I'm Justin Hinkle. If you found this useful, subscribe. New episodes come out regularly, and that's the easiest way not to miss one. This is the Travel Advisor Website Show. Stick around.